We're on the penultimate talk about Moses. If you remember, we've done an exposition consecutively, chapters 1 to 18, which leaves it nicely open for us when we return again to Exodus to look at the Ten Commandments. But we're finishing with 3 topical sermons, and both are really tremendously important topics for a time like this. We looked at Moses and prayer, and we need to be people of prayer at the moment. We looked at responsibility and leadership. We need to be, all of us, taking that responsibility. And then this one, we're looking really at walking with God in holiness and not tripping up at this stage in our pilgrimage. Not at this stage of the pandemic, nearly running out of energy, or at this stage of your Christian life thinking, I've had enough and I'm going to throw in the towel. We want to be people like Paul, don't we, who say at the end, I have finished the race, I have kept the faith, I'm going for the crown of righteousness. Because what we find here is that Moses is a man just like us. Just as Elijah was a man just like us, and David was a man just like us. And he's not perfect. The only hero is Jesus, isn't it? Moses was the meekest man on earth, we're told. Humble man. But he keeps having a problem with anger. Sometimes it's righteous, other times it's unrighteous. And basically, right near the end, he's nearly 120. He doesn't finish well. He misses his reward. He doesn't enter into the land. He could have entered into the land, but he makes a big mistake and he doesn't. So, let's have a look at this. And one of the proofs, if you like, one of the secondary proofs for the truth of the Bible is the fact that it does tell us all about the heroes who go wrong. It's not like some other holy books where the heroes never make mistakes. So Moses misses out. So let me take you quickly, if this will work, yeah. So this is Moses' big problem, anger and rage. Sometimes, as I say, anger's a good thing, it's a righteous anger, but if you've got that in you, you've got to be so careful that that doesn't spill over to a situation where you're like throwing matches at petrol. So quickly, just let's have a look. Remember when Moses was 40 in Exodus 2, he goes out and he kills an Egyptian who is being cruel to one of his own people. Maybe righteous anger, but it spills over into wrath and murder. He's 40 in his prime of life and he kills, and he's a murderer, and he flees to Midian. So, we pick him up next at 80 in Exodus 11:8. You remember Moses with his continual confrontations with Pharaoh. He finally gets so mad with Pharaoh, basically says, you'll never see my face again. And in hot anger, he leaves Pharaoh's presence. So that's when he's 80, 40, murderer, 80, starting to get angry. And then, as James just told us in the children's talk, remember Moses at Mount Sinai, he comes down with the 10 Commandments on 2 tablets. He sees the people worshipping the golden calf. He smashes the tablets in his anger. And he grinds them up. And he grinds up the golden calf. And he gets the people to drink that. And then he tells the people of God who are on his side to strap their swords on their side and go out and slaughter those who have been idolaters. And then when God says again to him, make the 10 Commandments, as James pointed out, it's like God says, okay, you broke them the first time, you make them this time, you carve them. So his anger is an issue that is, it's sort of on a pendulum, on a balance, sometimes righteous, sometimes spilling over. But jumping on another, so that's 40, 80, we're jumping on, he's about 119, 120, we're jumping on 40 years. He's been wandering around in the desert with this bunch of rebels for 40 years. They could have crossed into the promised land 40 years ago. They could have had 40 Passovers, but they've been in the wilderness for 40 years, and Moses is nearly 120. He's a junior, actually. He's a little whippersnapper if you compare him with Abraham. Abraham really didn't get going till 100, did he? And then he dies when he's 175. And Isaac, 180. Joshua, 110. Moses, 120. Have you read about that dear lady in Japan who's been so gracious? They offered her to be part of the Olympic torch-bearing. But because she's 118, she said she didn't want to go and do the torch-bearing because she might take the coronavirus back to her care home. Isn't that great? You're 118, you've got a chance to carry the torch, but you think of other people. Moses is just a little bit older than that Japanese lady. He's nearly 120. So I'm going to read to you now from Numbers 20, just so you know I'm not making this up. In the first month, the whole Israelite community arrived at the desert of Zin, and they stayed at Kadesh. Now that has overtones of the word holiness in the word Kadesh. There Miriam died and was buried. So just remember that, Miriam, his sister, has just died. He's in a bad place. If this sounds familiar to you, when I last preached, I preached on this occasion 40 years before that. So this moaning mob is still moaning, okay? Now there was no water for the community, and the people gathered in opposition to Moses and Aaron. They quarrelled with Moses and said, "If only we had died when our brothers fell dead before the Lord. Why did you bring the Lord's community into this desert that we and our livestock should die here? Why did you bring us up out of Egypt to this terrible place? It's got no grain or Wetherspoons or Wilco's or figs or grapevines or pomegranates, and there is no water to drink." Does that sound familiar? They were saying that 40 years ago. And this generation are about to die out. The only ones who are going to survive are Caleb and Joshua. Moses and Aaron went from the assembly to the entrance to the tent of meeting, and they fell face down, and the glory of the Lord appeared to them. The Lord said to Moses, "Take the staff," I think this is Aaron's rod that budded, "take the staff, and you and your brother Aaron gather the assembly together. Speak to that rock before their eyes, and it will pour out its water." Notice what he says, speak to that rock. "You will bring water out of the rock for the community, so they and their livestock can drink." So Moses took the staff from the Lord's presence, just as he commanded him. He and Aaron gathered the assembly together in front of the rock, and Moses said to them, "Listen, you rebels, must we bring you water out of this rock?" Then Moses raised his arm and struck the rock twice with his staff. Water gushed out, and the community and their livestock drank. But the Lord said to Moses and Aaron, "Because you did not trust in me enough to honor me as holy in the sight of the Israelites, you will not bring this community into the land I give them." These were the waters of Meribah, where the Israelites quarreled with the Lord and where he showed himself holy among them. So Moses misses out. He finally blows it. He's nearly got there, and he loses his rag and disobeys the Lord. And the punishment, the consequence, the chastisement of him is he's not going to cross the Jordan into the promised land. There's severe consequences for this mistake. Think of David with Bathsheba. Things were never the same after that. Right at a point of breakthrough, there can be a point of sin. So he misses out, he doesn't get his reward. His weak point is anger. So what's your weak point? I could just preach about anger, couldn't I? But what's your weak point? What is the thing that could, were not for the grace of God, and you deciding in your heart, whatever happens, I'm going to follow Jesus. What is it that could trip you up and stop you entering to all that God has got for you? Because there is something. There is some weakness in you. There is some besetting sin in you that, left to your own devices and left to the Satan's tempting of you, will wipe out your Christian life, and you will not fulfill everything that God has got for you. Because this is crisis time in the world, in the church, in our lives. I'm calling you this morning to think carefully, to walk circumspectly. Just walk like a cat on top of a wall. Carefully walking, working out your salvation with fear and trembling, because God is at work in you, both to do and to will of his good pleasure. But there is a weakness in your life, and Satan knows what it is, and some of your friends know what it is, but this is a call, as we go through the life of Moses, to learn from these events that were written down for us, upon whom the ends of the ages have come. These are written down not so that they can be nice Sunday school lessons on felt. These are written down so that our lives can fulfill God's eternal purposes for us as individuals and as a church. Because churches can be wiped out by this. In the press at the moment, I read the Christian press, I read the secular press, I read the Bible and I read the newspaper, like Spurgeon told me to do. And I find in the press leaders and Christian people of influence falling right, left and centre because of pride, because of power, because of arrogance, because of a feeling that they're invulnerable, because of sexual sin, because of money and corruption. These are interesting days. These are critical days. The world needs the church, but it needs it to be holy and full of light and truth, choosing to follow in the light, the God of light. So these are severe consequences. And you might say to me, whoa, that's a bit harsh. What was going on here? Well, if you look at it carefully, God said, I want you to speak to the rock. He didn't say, I want you to whack it with a holy rod. And Moses, instead of speaking to the rock, speaks to the people and sort of nags them, actually. He speaks in anger. In Psalm 106, verse 33, which comments on this, it says, Moses spoke rashly at Meribah in the wilderness. And there's a focus, Moses brings the focus in on him and Aaron to bring water to these people. We're the providers, you moaning mob, instead of them looking to God. And he hits the rock with the holy staff. He hits it not just once, he hits it twice. And I sense there's a bit of a surprise in Moses because he's whacking it and then suddenly the aquifer flows. And the rock, as we know, is a symbol of God and his mercy and provision. Maybe, and this is me reading now into the text, maybe Moses, after 40 years, he's just so angry now that this lot are going to be let off once again. And also, remember, he's in a bad place maybe because he's just lost his sister. But whatever, Moses is telling off the rebels and becoming a rebel himself. Moses is angry with them because they don't obey God, and he himself disobeys God. And he says in the next book, Deuteronomy 3:26, reflecting in his last words really, as he prepares the people to cross the Jordan, and he himself is not going to go, and he prepares and he repeats his sermons. The Lord was angry with me on that day. And he prays. We're told in Deuteronomy, Moses prays a few times, let me, forgive me, let me go over. And God says no. Because God sometimes says no. Paul prayed 3 times about his thorn in the flesh, didn't he? And God said no. And Moses prays and God says no. So the generation that left Egypt fails to enter in to the promised land. Miriam is not going to go over. Aaron's not going to go over. Moses is not going to go over. Do you sometimes have a fear that if God were to move in power on our nation in revival, that we might miss out? Do I, as a preacher and a leader, sometimes think, and I have done in this last 15 months, think, I've kind of retired from secular. Shall I just retire? I've had enough. Do I want to lay awake at night worrying about the church or dealing with difficult Christian people who are the worst difficult kind of people to deal with, aren't they? Should I just go and walk in the countryside and pray with God and read and have sweet fellowship with God and maybe once a month go and sit at the back of one of the big churches in the centre of Nottingham and slip in and slip out and just take it easy? Or should I fulfill God's purposes for me? Do you have choices like that? Perhaps you don't. Perhaps it's just me. Do you ever fear you won't make it? Well, good. Good. You're in a desperately difficult and dangerous place. You think you can do this on your own. You take heed. You take heed lest you think you can do it on your own. These things were written down for us upon whom the ends of the ages, so that we learn from this, and those of us who think we're standing firm, just be careful. Just be careful. You are not invulnerable. So, warnings to us upon whom the ends of the ages have come. If this thing will work. Come on. Can you move it on, somebody? There we go. Second point. How am I doing? They're not all as long. 1 Corinthians 10. I've just been quoting to it. He says, Paul, I don't want you to be ignorant of the fact, brothers, that our forefathers were under the cloud, they passed through the sea, they were baptized into Moses, they ate the manna, they drank from the rock, and now these things occurred as examples to keep us from setting our hearts on evil things as they did. Do not be idolaters as some of them were. Don't commit sexual immorality as some of them did. Don't test the Lord as some of them did. Don't grumble. These things happened to them as examples and were written down as warnings for us, on whom the fulfillment of the ages have come. So, if you think you are standing firm, be careful that you don't fall. But there is some good news. No temptation has seized you, except what is common to man. And God is faithful. He will not let you be tempted beyond what you can bear. But when you are tempted, he will also provide a way out, so that you can stand up under it. So being tempted is not a problem. That's because you're on the winning side. You've crossed from death to life. You're dangerous to the enemy. He's tempting you. He wants to trip you up. Satan can't stop you being saved. You're saved forever. Once saved forever. The Father has chosen you in all eternity. The Son is holding you. The Spirit has sealed you to the day of redemption. You are born again of imperishable seed, not perishable. You are regenerate of the Holy Spirit. You're all right. You're going to get to heaven. But if Satan can mess you up so you don't fulfill your destiny and you can be a bad witness to other people and stop others becoming Christians and you can split churches and you can break marriages and everything else like that, then Satan's quite happy with that. These are examples and warnings to us. Be careful, don't fall. Keep short accounts with God. Tell people if you're struggling. But at the end of the day, be obedient. Faith and obedience go together. The great old commentator, preacher, F.B. Meyer, great preacher, said from this passage in his commentary, they who disobey do not believe, and they who do not believe disobey. It all comes down to mixing this up with faith. As it says, the New Testament writers think about this passage an awful lot. Hebrews 3, so as the Holy Spirit says, today, if you hear his voice, don't harden your hearts as you did in the rebellion during the time of testing in the desert, where your fathers tested and tried me, and for 40 years saw what I did. That is why I was angry with that generation, and I said, their hearts are always going astray, and they have not known my ways. See to it, brothers and sisters, that none of you has a sinful, unbelieving heart that turns away from the living God. So, don't harden your heart. That's a simple message. If I've been speaking to you and you've been thinking, yeah, that could trip me up, don't harden your heart. Ask God for help. Ask friends for help. Just keep going. There's a finish line ahead there. Just keep going. Don't give up now. Don't give up. Just keep going for that finishing line. So as we come out of this pandemic and as we enter into a new phase in the life of the world and church and Nottingham and us, as a new season, new opportunities, we've maybe had time to reflect on what we want to leave behind. Maybe we've realised, actually, somebody said to me they realised for many years, as a Christian, they've just been sitting on their hands. Maybe you've had a revelation that actually you've been wasting your life, really. You've just been doggy paddling, really. And you should have been doing the crawl. You should have been going with it. Maybe it's been a wake-up call for you these last months. There's a new opportunity. Let's go forward full of faith, trust and obedience. Be faithful to the end. Be holy in all that we do. Let's be a people who go forward in faith and holiness and obedience, and not at this stage lose our race that's set before us. Amen.